For 3 centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's favorite punching bag. We were the newcomers, the primitives, the species that barely crawled out of our gravity well before stumbling into a universe already carved up by ancient empires. The Veltar had their crystal cities spanning 1,000 worlds. The Kethmori commanded fleets that could crack planets. The Zephyrian Collective had technology so advanced it seemed like magic. And humanity? We had stubbornness. That stubbornness kept us alive when the Galactic Council declared Earth a protected primitive zone and relocated us to colony worlds like cattle. It sustained us through decades of being treated as manual laborers, mining dangerous asteroids that sophisticated species wouldn't risk their precious lives on. It burned bright when our brightest minds were dismissed from universities, our innovations stolen and credited to more advanced species. But stubbornness, they would learn, was just the surface. Beneath it lay something the galaxy had never encountered in its millions of years of recorded history. Something that didn't show up in their genetic scans or psychological profiles. Something that had driven humanity from caves to stars in just a few thousand years while other species took millions. They called it primitive emotion. We called it fire. And, after 300 years of systematic oppression, 300 years of being told we were inferior, 300 years of watching our children grow up believing they were second-class beings in their own universe. The fire was about to be unleashed. What happened next would reshape the galaxy forever. Because humanity had learned something during those centuries of subjugation, something our oppressors never suspected, we had been studying them. Learning from them. Adapting. And we had been preparing. The declaration was coming. And, when it arrived, 13 species who thought they knew everything about warfare, about power, about dominance, would discover what happens when you push the descendants of Terra just one step too far. The mining station Kepler 442 floated in the darkness like a broken tooth against the backdrop of dying stars. Commander Sarah Chan pressed her palm against the cold metal of the observation deck's window, watching another transport ship loaded with precious metals disappear into hyperspace. The cargo held enough rare earth elements to power a dozen worlds for a century, all extracted by human hands from the radioactive hell of the asteroid field below. None of it would ever see Earth. Another successful extraction, Commander, reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice carrying that familiar bitter edge they all shared. The Veltar delegation seemed particularly pleased with the tritium yield. Sarah turned from the window, studying the faces of her crew. They were young, most of them born on colony worlds, raised with the understanding that humanity existed to serve. But, lately, something had been changing in their eyes. The same thing she'd been feeling in her chest for months now, a burning that had nothing to do with the radiation exposure from the mining operations. "How many this month?" she asked quietly. Torres consulted his tablet, though they both knew he didn't need to check. 17 transports. That's our highest efficiency rating ever. The council should be proud of their pet humans. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah felt her jaw clench involuntarily. Pet humans. That's what the Kethmori ambassador had called them last week during his inspection tour. He'd said it with such casual dismissal, as if commenting on the weather. As if they weren't sentient beings with hopes and dreams and the capacity to feel humiliation burning in their throats like acid. "Commander," came a voice from the communications station. Ensign Park, barely 22 and already showing the telltale signs of radiation sickness despite the best medical care their limited supplies could provide. "Incoming priority transmission. It's from Admiral Reeves." Sarah felt her heart skip. Admiral Marcus Reeves was humanity's highest-ranking officer in the Colonial Defense Force, though defense was a generous term for what was essentially a labor coordination unit. More importantly, he was one of the few humans left who remembered Earth. Who remembered when humanity had dreams bigger than efficiently extracting resources for alien masters. "Put it through to my office," she ordered, then paused. "And activate privacy shields." The walk to her cramped office felt longer than usual. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Priority communications from the Admiral usually meant quota increases, new safety restrictions that somehow made their jobs more dangerous, or notification of another human colony being relocated for the greater good of galactic harmony. The hologram flickered to life as she sealed the door behind her. Admiral Reeves looked older than his 63 years, his face carved with lines that spoke of 3 decades watching his species slowly suffocate under the weight of alien benevolence. But, today, something different burned in his dark eyes. "Sarah," he began without preamble. "How secure is your station?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir? We follow all Council protocols. Daily security sweeps, standard." "I'm not talking about their security, Commander. I'm talking about ours." He leaned forward, and Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Not from age or illness, she realized. From barely contained excitement. "How many of your people can you trust completely?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't anything she'd been trained for in 20 years of service. "All of them, sir. We're family here." A smile ghosted across the Admiral's weathered features. "Good. Because in 72 hours, everything is going to change. The game we've been playing for 3 centuries? It's about to end." Before Sarah could respond, he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper despite the encrypted channel. "Tell me, Commander. Have you ever wondered why a species that went from horse-drawn carriages to faster-than-light travel in less than 2 centuries suddenly stopped innovating the moment we met our galactic neighbors?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Of course she'd wondered. Every human with half a brain had wondered. They'd gone from primitive planet-bound creatures to interstellar travelers in an evolutionary blink, then, suddenly, became content to serve as manual laborers and resource extractors. It had never made sense. "The Council's education programs," she said slowly, reciting the official explanation. "They taught us that our rapid development was unsustainable. That we needed guidance to mature properly as a species." Horseshit. The vulgarity was startling coming from the normally composed Admiral. "Sarah, what if I told you that we never stopped innovating? What if I told you that for 300 years, humanity's brightest minds have been working in secret? That every slight, every humiliation, every time they treated us like children or animals or worse, we were learning? Adapting? Preparing?" Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair. The implications were staggering. "Sir, that would be treason against the Galactic Council." The penalties for what? For being human?" The Admiral's voice carried a fury she'd never heard before. "For refusing to accept that we're inherently inferior to species that needed millions of years to achieve what we accomplished in millennia?" He stood up, beginning to pace in the small confines of his own office, the hologram tracking his movement. "Do you know what humanity's greatest strength has always been, Sarah? It wasn't our technology or our weapons or our strategies. It was our ability to look at the impossible and refuse to accept it." Images flashed through Sarah's mind. Stories from the old archives that the Council allowed them to keep. Humans climbing impossible mountains because they were there. Humans building machines to fly despite being born without wings. Humans splitting atoms and walking on their moon and reaching for the stars not because it was easy, but because it was hard. "What are you saying, Admiral?" "I'm saying that in 72 hours, the Galactic Council is going to learn something about humanity that they should have figured out centuries ago." His eyes burned with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch. "We don't break. We bend, we adapt, we endure, but we don't break. And when you keep pushing something that doesn't break." He let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Eventually, it pushes back." The hologram flickered as the Admiral reached for something off-screen, returning with a simple metal cylinder about the size of a food ration. "This is going out to every human commander in the galaxy. 738 station chiefs, fleet captains, and colony governors. When you activate it, you'll receive detailed instructions." "But, Sarah?" His voice became deadly serious. Once you open this, there's no going back. You'll be committed to a path that ends in either humanity's liberation or its complete extinction. Sarah stared at the cylinder as if it were a live explosive. Which, in a very real sense, it probably was. What about the consequences? The Council has weapons that could sterilize every human world in the galaxy. They could try. The Admiral's smile was sharp as a blade. But that assumes they'll have the time, the resources, and the infrastructure to coordinate such an attack. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Sarah, what's the one thing every military tactician learns about warfare? She thought back to her training, to the war games and simulations they'd run. Control the supply lines. Exactly. And who controls the galaxy's supply lines, Sarah? Who mines the resources? Who maintains the shipping lanes? Who keeps the infrastructure running while the superior species sit in their council chambers and debate philosophy? The realization hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Humans. Humans did all of that. They were everywhere, integrated into every system, trusted because they were seen as harmless. 3 centuries of being underestimated had given them access to everything. My God, she whispered. He helps those who help themselves, the Admiral replied grimly. The cylinder contains coordinates for a rendezvous point in the outer rim. Neutral space, outside Council jurisdiction. You'll bring your most trusted people and as many supplies as you can discreetly transfer without raising suspicion. The timeline is tight, but it's been planned for decades. Sarah picked up the cylinder with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch, as if it contained something alive. In a way, she supposed it did. It contained hope. And hope, she was beginning to realize, was humanity's most dangerous weapon. Admiral, she said quietly, what happens to the people who don't make it out? The families on the colony worlds? The workers who can't reach the rendezvous points? For the first time since the conversation began, the Admiral's resolve seemed to waver. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of accumulated grief. That's why we have to succeed, Sarah. Because if we fail, if this doesn't work, then everything we've endured will have been for nothing. Every sacrifice, every humiliation, every child who grew up believing they were inferior, it all has to mean something. The hologram began to flicker, indicating the encrypted channel was reaching its time limit. Remember, Commander. 72 hours. And, Sarah? He looked directly into her eyes through the projection. When this begins, when the galaxy starts burning, remember that they chose this. Every empire that falls, every station that goes dark, every ship that disappears, they made those choices when they decided we weren't worthy of basic dignity. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone in her office with a metal cylinder that weighed no more than a meal ration but felt as heavy as the fate of her entire species. Outside her window, another transport ship was docking. More resources to be extracted, more wealth to be shipped to distant worlds where humans were forbidden to set foot. She watched Veltar overseers directing human workers with the casual arrogance of farmers managing livestock. 72 hours. Sarah activated her communications console and began composing messages to her senior staff. Routine maintenance schedules, supply requests, shift rotations, all perfectly normal administrative communications that would, when decoded properly, begin the process of discreetly preparing her people for what was coming. As she worked, she found herself thinking about her grandmother's stories. Tales of ancient Terra, of humans who stood on beaches and declared they would conquer the seas, who looked at the sky and swore they would claim the stars. Stories of a species that had never learned how to surrender. The galaxy was about to remember why. The cylinder sat on her desk like a promise of fire, and Sarah Chen smiled for the first time in months. They had pushed humanity too far. Now came the pushback. The rendezvous coordinates led to a dead system at the edge of Kethmori space, where 3 dying stars cast sickly red light across a field of shattered planets. Sarah had expected to find a handful of ships, maybe a few dozen human commanders who'd been trusted with the same impossible secret that now burned in her chest. She hadn't expected to find an armada. Hundreds of vessels filled the space around the largest planetary fragment, everything from mining haulers to transport ships to sleek courier vessels that should have been nowhere near the outer rim. As her shuttle approached the designated flagship, Sarah felt her hands trembling on the controls. This wasn't a desperate rebellion by a handful of malcontents. This was systematic. Organized. Massive. This was 3 centuries of careful preparation finally bearing fruit. The flagship turned out to be an old Terran heavy cruiser, the Vindication, a museum piece that should have been decommissioned decades ago. But, as Sarah's shuttle settled into its docking bay, she could see the ship had been extensively modified. Weapon hardpoints that hadn't existed on the original blueprints. Armor plating with a crystalline shimmer that suggested Veltar technology. Engine signatures that belonged to no known human design. Admiral Reeves met her at the airlock, but he wasn't alone. A dozen figures stood behind him, and Sarah's breath caught as she recognized some of them. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, supposedly killed in a mining accident on Proxima Station 5 years ago. Captain James Morrison, who'd been court-martialed for insubordination and exiled to the penal colonies. Major Chen Lu, her own cousin, who disappeared during a routine patrol mission 8 months ago. "Welcome aboard the Vindication, Commander," the Admiral said, his voice carrying an authority she'd never heard before. "Welcome to humanity's Shadow Fleet." Sarah stepped through the airlock on legs that felt like water. "I don't understand. These people are supposed to be dead, or missing, or disappeared, or transferred to classified assignments, or any of a dozen other cover stories we've been using for decades." Dr. Kane stepped forward, and Sarah noticed the woman looked younger than she remembered. Healthier. "Sarah, meet the Blackfleet Admiralty. Every human who vanished under suspicious circumstances over the past 30 years? We're all here." The tour that followed shattered every assumption Sarah had held about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Vindication's medical bay contained technology that made council hospitals look primitive. The engineering sections housed fabrication systems that could produce materials stronger than anything in known galactic databases. The weapons systems were completely unfamiliar, based on principles that seemed to violate several laws of physics. What was all Sarah could manage as they stood on the observation deck, watching hundreds of human ships conduct maneuvers that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what the Council believed humanity possessed. "The same way we've survived everything else," Admiral Reeves replied. "By being underestimated." He gestured toward the fleet. "Every mining operation, every salvage mission, every routine maintenance assignment, we've been collecting resources, technology, and people. The galaxy sees humans as manual laborers, so they never question why our mining yields are sometimes slightly lower than expected. They never notice when decommissioned ships disappear from scrapyards. They never wonder why our casualty rates in dangerous assignments are just a little higher than statistics would predict." Captain Morrison, a weathered man with scars that spoke of battles the Council would never hear about, added, "We've had 300 years to study every species in the galaxy. Their technology, their weaknesses, their military doctrines. They've studied us for 300 years and learned almost nothing, because they never bothered to look past their own prejudices." Dr. Kane led them to a massive holographic display at the center of the observation deck. With a gesture, she activated a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light appeared, connected by flowing lines that pulsed with different colors. "This is the true structure of galactic civilization," she explained. "Red lines are resource flows. Blue lines are communication networks. Green lines are transportation corridors." The map was breathtaking in its complexity, showing the intricate web of connections that bound 13 species across millions of worlds. Then, she made another gesture, and roughly half the points of light changed to orange. "These are positions currently held by humans. Mining stations, maintenance facilities, communication relays, shipping waypoints. We're not just laborers, Sarah. We're the nervous system of galactic civilization. Every major supply line, every critical infrastructure node, every point of vulnerability, we're already there." Sarah stared at the map in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. "You're saying we could shut it down," Admiral Reeves confirmed grimly. All of it. In the space of a few hours, we could bring 13 advanced civilizations to their knees without firing a shot. No resources, no communication, no transportation. Complete systemic collapse. The weight of it was overwhelming. Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. But that would kill billions. The suffering would be astronomical, Dr. Kane agreed quietly. Which is why we're not going to do it. Not exactly. Major Chin Lu, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Sarah was shocked by how much her cousin had changed. The uncertain young officer she remembered had been replaced by someone harder, more focused. Sarah, what do you think would happen if the Council discovered what we've been doing? If they realized the true scope of human capabilities? The question was rhetorical, but Sarah answered anyway. They'd exterminate us. Complete genocide. They wouldn't risk letting us spread to other systems. Exactly. So we can't give them that chance. Lu activated another display, this one showing fleet movements across the galaxy. In 18 hours, the declaration will be transmitted simultaneously to every Council member world. It will be simple, direct, and completely non-negotiable. The Admiral moved to stand beside the display. The terms are straightforward. Full independence for all human colonies. Immediate cessation of resource extraction quotas. Recognition of humanity as a sovereign power with equal status in galactic politics. And reparations. Sarah felt her eyebrows rise. Reparations? 3 centuries of stolen labor and resources, Captain Morrison said, his voice flat. The economic value of human work over that time period, calculated with compound interest, amounts to roughly 60% of the combined gross domestic product of the 13 Council species. The number was so large as to be meaningless. Sarah tried to process it and failed. They'll never agree to those terms. It would bankrupt them. Probably, the Admiral acknowledged. Which is why they'll have a choice to make. Agree to our terms, or watch their civilization collapse when we withdraw our labor and seize control of their infrastructure. Dr. Kane brought up another display showing detailed schematics of Council military vessels. We've spent centuries maintaining their ships, building their weapons, mining their fuel. Every technological advantage they think they have over us? We helped create it. We know how to neutralize it. Sarah studied the schematics, noticing subtle modifications marked in red. You sabotaged them. Not sabotaged, Captain Morrison corrected. Enhanced. Every major Council warship has been fitted with human-manufactured components over the past 50 years. Components that can be remotely disabled when we choose to activate certain frequencies. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. 3 centuries of patient preparation, of systematic infiltration, of appearing weak while growing strong. Sarah felt a mixture of awe and terror at what her species had accomplished in secret. But what if they call our bluff, she asked. What if they decide to fight anyway? The silence that followed her question was heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Admiral Reeves spoke, his voice carrying the weight of terrible necessity. Then, we show them what humanity learned during our brief but memorable history of warfare on Earth. We show them what happens when a species that conquered an entire planet in less than 10,000 years decides to stop playing nice. He gestured toward the fleet outside. Every ship you see out there is armed with weapons based on human innovation, not alien technology. Kinetic accelerators that can punch through any known shielding. Fusion warheads that burn hotter than stellar cores. Nanoweapon swarms that can dismantle a ship from the inside out in minutes. Dr. Kane added, we've also developed countermeasures for every known Council defense system. Their energy shields are useless against our phase variance weapons. Their point defense networks can't track our adaptive missiles. Their computer systems are vulnerable to logic viruses we've been refining for decades. Sarah felt sick. You're talking about genocide. We're talking about survival, Major Lu said sharply. They made the choice, Sarah. 3 centuries ago, They decided we weren't worth treating with dignity or respect. They decided our children should grow up believing they were inferior. They decided our entire species existed to serve them. Her voice became deadly quiet. If they want to make that decision final, if they want to choose war over justice, then we'll give them a war they can't win. The holographic displays shifted, showing potential battle scenarios. In every simulation, human forces achieved total victory within days. The Council fleets, dependent on infrastructure controlled by humans and vulnerable to sabotage, collapsed almost immediately. Planetary defenses, built with human labor and maintained by human technicians, turned against their creators. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah whispered. "Since the day they moved us off Earth," Admiral Reeves replied. "Since the first time a human child was told they weren't smart enough to attend a real university. Since the first time one of our scientists had their work stolen and credited to someone else. Since the first time we buried someone who died mining resources they'd never be allowed to benefit from." He turned to face her directly. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about anger or hatred or any of the emotions the Council thinks motivate primitive species. This is about ensuring that humanity has a future. That our children get to grow up free." Outside the observation windows, the human fleet continued its maneuvers. Ships moved with precision and purpose, their crews working with the efficiency that came from generations of being underestimated. Sarah watched them and tried to imagine what the galaxy would look like when this was over. "What happens after?" she asked. "If we succeed, if the Council accepts our terms or is forced to accept them, what then?" Dr. Kane smiled, and, for the first time since Sarah had arrived, the expression seemed genuinely hopeful. "Then, we do what humanity has always done. We reach for the next impossible thing. There are galaxies beyond this one, Sarah. Frontiers that no species has ever explored. With our technology and our freedom, we could." She trailed off, but Sarah could see the possibilities in her eyes. Humanity had spent 3 centuries learning to be small, learning to serve, learning to accept limitations. But their true nature had never been small. Their true nature had built pyramids and cathedrals and space elevators because someone said it couldn't be done. 18 hours, Admiral Reeves said quietly. "In 18 hours, the declaration will be transmitted. The galaxy will learn that humanity is no longer willing to kneel." He looked at each of them in turn. "Are you ready to stand?" Sarah thought about her crew back on Kepler 442, young people who'd never known freedom but who carried the same fire in their hearts that had driven their ancestors to the stars. She thought about human children on colony worlds, growing up believing they were second-class citizens in their own universe. She thought about 3 centuries of accumulated injustice and the weight of hope that could finally be set free. "Yes," she said, and her voice carried the certainty of 300 years of preparation. "We're ready." The declaration would come with the dawn. And, with it, the galaxy would learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far. The declaration reached the Galactic Council at 0600 Standard Galactic Time, transmitted simultaneously to every member world through channels the Council thought were secure. Within minutes, it became clear that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. High Chancellor Velthak of the Veltar Supremacy was in the middle of his morning meditation when the priority alert shattered the crystalline silence of his private chamber. The holographic message that materialized before him was deceptively simple, a human figure in what appeared to be a military uniform, standing against a backdrop of stars. "My name is Admiral Marcus Reeves of the Terran Liberation Fleet," the figure began, and Velthak felt his primary heart skip a rhythm. "The Terran Liberation Fleet?" Humans didn't have fleets. They had work crews. For 300 years, humanity has served the Galactic Council faithfully. We have mined your resources, built your infrastructure, and died in your dangerous operations. We have asked for nothing but basic dignity and been denied even that. Today, this arrangement ends. Velthak's secondary hearts began racing as the implications hit him. This couldn't be real. Humans were a client species, barely above primitives. They had no military capabilities, no independent technology base, no, as of this moment, all human personnel are withdrawing from Council operations. All resource extraction quotas are suspended indefinitely. All transportation and maintenance services provided by human workers will cease until our demands are met. The hologram shifted, showing what appeared to be thousands of human starships in formation. Velthak's tertiary heart stopped entirely. Those weren't crude mining vessels or transport haulers. Those were warships. Advanced warships using technology he didn't recognize. Our demands are non-negotiable. Full independence for all human colonies. Immediate recognition of humanity as a sovereign power with equal standing in galactic politics. And reparations for 3 centuries of exploited labor, calculated at current market rates with compound interest. Velthak was reaching for his emergency communicator when the Admiral continued speaking, and the words froze his manipulator appendages in mid-motion. We are not unreasonable beings. We understand that these demands represent a significant adjustment to galactic power structures. Therefore, you have 72 hours to consider our terms. If they are not accepted within that timeframe, we will demonstrate why humanity's rapid technological development was never actually dependent on your guidance. The transmission ended, leaving Velthak alone in his chamber with a growing sense that the universe had just fundamentally shifted beneath his feet. He activated his communicator with trembling digits and began issuing emergency orders. Within an hour, the entire council was convening an emergency session. Similar scenes played out across 13 different worlds as the reality of the situation became clear. On Kethmori Prime, Fleet Admiral Zendar discovered that 60% of his deep space vessels weren't responding to communications. On Zephyrian Central, the master computers that coordinated planetary defense networks were displaying error messages in languages no Zephyrian could read. On a dozen other worlds, the foundations of galactic civilization began showing cracks that had apparently existed for centuries. The Emergency Council session convened in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime, the neutral world that had hosted galactic politics for over 2 millennia. Representatives from 13 species gathered with their advisors, their military attaches, and their rapidly growing sense of panic. High Chancellor Velthak called the session to order with his voice carrying none of its usual authority. We are here to address what appears to be a coordinated rebellion by human client populations across the galaxy. Our preliminary reports suggest, interrupted War Prime Kethmar of the Kethmori Empire. Chancellor, this isn't a rebellion. This is a coordinated military action by a species we thought was barely capable of independent thought. He activated a holographic display showing fleet movements across known space. In the last 6 hours, human populations have simultaneously evacuated over 3,000 installations. They've disabled communications on 47 worlds. They've seized control of major shipping lanes throughout the Outer Rim. This required planning, organization, and capabilities we never suspected they possessed. Trade speaker Zinfil of the Merchant Consortium raised one of her 4 arms. The economic implications alone are catastrophic. 17% of our mining operations have gone dark. Transportation networks are collapsing as human crewed vessels simply disappear. If this continues for more than a few days, supply chains across the galaxy will begin failing. Defense Coordinator Ulthren of the Security Alliance activated his own display, showing what appeared to be human warships engaging Council patrol vessels near the Hydra sector. This footage was taken 3 hours ago. Those aren't mining ships or transport vessels. Those are military craft using weapons technology that shouldn't exist in human hands. The footage was disturbing. Council ships that should have easily outclassed any human vessel were being systematically destroyed by weapons that seemed to ignore their defensive systems entirely. Energy shields that had protected them for millennia simply failed. Point defense networks designed to stop any known projectile were overwhelmed by missiles that changed their targeting profiles in real time. Scientific advisor Dr. Quintal of the Research Collective studied the tactical data with growing alarm. These weapons signatures, they're based on theoretical principles we abandoned centuries ago as impractical. How did humans develop this technology independently? Maybe they didn't, War Prime Kethmar said grimly. Maybe they've been studying our technology for 300 years, learning from it, improving on it, while we treated them like children playing with toys. The revelation hung in the chamber like poison gas. For 3 centuries, the Council had maintained its technological superiority by carefully controlling access to advanced knowledge. But humans had been integrated into every level of galactic infrastructure. They'd maintained the ships, built the weapons, operated the equipment. If they'd been learning, adapting, innovating in secret. Chancellor Velthak felt his worldview crumbling. What are our response options? Fleet Admiral Zemdar consulted his tactical advisors before answering. Limited, Chancellor. We've lost communication with 60% of our deep space assets. Ships that are responding report significant system failures. It appears that human-manufactured components throughout our fleets have been compromised. The word fell into silence. Sabotage. 3 centuries of sabotage, so subtle and systematic that they'd never detected it. Every ship they'd trusted humans to maintain, every system they'd allowed humans to build, had apparently been prepared for this moment. Dr. Quintal was running calculations on his personal device, and his expression grew more disturbed with each result. If human workers have truly withdrawn from all operations galaxy-wide, our civilization will begin experiencing critical failures within days. Food distribution, energy production, waste management, atmospheric processing on colony worlds, it's all dependent on infrastructure they maintain. Then, we force them back, Kethmar declared. We have superior numbers, superior technology, do we? Ulthran interrupted. Our superior technology was built and maintained by the same people who are now in rebellion. Our superior numbers mean nothing if our ships can't function and our weapons can't fire. He gestured toward the tactical displays. Look at those battle reports again. Human vessels are achieving impossible efficiency ratings. Either they've made technological breakthroughs that surpass our entire scientific establishment, or they know our defensive systems better than we do. The implications were staggering. 3 centuries of believing they were the shepherds of a primitive species, only to discover they'd been infiltrated and systematically undermined by beings they'd dismissed as inferior. Trade speaker Zinfil pulled up economic projections that painted a nightmare scenario. If this continues for a week, we'll see supply chain failures across 17 sectors. If it continues for a month, we'll have genuine starvation on multiple worlds. The humans weren't just workers, they were the circulatory system of our entire civilization. Chancellor Velthak felt ancient. The crystal cities of Veltar Prime had stood for 50,000 years, their beauty and complexity a testament to his species' superiority. Now he was being told that their survival depended on the goodwill of beings they treated as little better than livestock. What about their demand for reparations? He asked quietly. Dr. Quintal's calculations were sobering. 3 centuries of human labor, valued at current market rates with compound interest, would amount to approximately 60% of our combined gross domestic product. Paying it would bankrupt our civilizations. And refusing to pay it? The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood the implied threat. Humanity had demonstrated they could bring galactic civilization to its knees through passive resistance alone. If they chose active warfare, Fleet Admiral Zemdar spoke for all of them. Based on what we've seen today, refusing their demands would likely result in our complete military defeat within weeks. Our ships are compromised, our defensive systems are vulnerable, and their technological capabilities appear to exceed our own. It was the most devastating military assessment in galactic history. 13 species that had dominated the galaxy for millions of years, brought low by beings they'd considered primitives. Chancellor Velthak stood slowly, feeling the weight of civilizations resting on his decisions. What are the Council's options? The silence stretched until Dr. Quintal finally spoke. Realistically? We can accept their terms, or we can watch our civilizations collapse. There are no military options that don't end in our defeat. There are no economic options that don't end in our bankruptcy. We've spent 3 centuries creating total dependency on human labor and expertise. They planned this, Warprime Kethmar said, his voice filled with something that might have been admiration. For 3 centuries, while we thought we were civilizing them, they were preparing to overthrow us. Every ship they built for us, every system they maintained, every resource they extracted, it was all part of a plan to gain independence. Trade speaker Zinfil activated a display showing the scope of human integration into galactic infrastructure. The numbers were overwhelming. They're everywhere. Every critical system, every vital operation, every point of failure in our civilization, humans are already there. The realization was crushing. They hadn't conquered humanity. They'd invited humanity to conquer them, slowly and systematically, over the course of 3 centuries. Every act of condescension, every dismissal of human capabilities, had blinded them to what was really happening. Chancellor Velthak made his decision with the weight of history pressing down on him. Draft a response to the human demands. Full acceptance of their terms. Chancellor Kethmar protested. The political implications of refusal are the extinction of our species. Velthak cut him off. We underestimated them for 300 years. I refuse to make that mistake again. He looked around the chamber at representatives of 13 species that had once ruled the galaxy. Perhaps it's time we learned what humanity tried to teach us centuries ago. That intelligence isn't measured by the age of your civilization. That technological advancement isn't about following established patterns. That the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a predator, it's prey that's tired of being hunted. The declaration had arrived with humanity's dawn. As the council prepared its response, the galaxy began to understand that a new age had begun. An age where the species that had conquered a planet in 10,000 years would show the rest of the universe what 3 centuries of patience could accomplish. Humanity had finally pushed back. And nothing would ever be the same.